Stop the car." The voice was calm but commanding. Richard Hale wasn't a man who repeated himself. His new driver, Daniel, immediately pulled the sleek black Mercedes to the side of the street. Richard Hale was no ordinary passenger. He was a self-made millionaire, a real estate tycoon who had clawed his way out of poverty with nothing but grit, ambition, and an unshakable instinct for human character. Now in his late 50s, with silver hair combed neatly back and eyes sharp as steel, he had seen more betrayals than most men could stomach. For Richard, money wasn't just currency. It was a magnet that revealed a person's true nature. Some people crumbled at the sight of it. Others worshipped it blindly. Very few could resist it. And those few were the ones Richard trusted. That's why he was here today, conducting a test that no job description could ever list. He had just hired a new driver, Daniel, a young man in his late 20s with a clean record and polite manners. On paper, Daniel was perfect. But Richard knew better than to trust paper. The real test sat quietly on the leather seat beside him, a polished black briefcase. To any casual eye, it looked ordinary. But inside was something extraordinary. $250,000 in neatly stacked $100 bills. Enough to tempt almost anyone. Richard had left it slightly open on purpose. The shiny metal latch wasn't fastened, and if one glanced at it from the right angle, crisp green bills peeked out, practically glowing under the car's interior lights. He leaned forward, placing a firm hand on the case before stepping out. "I'll be gone for an hour," Richard said coolly. "Watch the car." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." Richard didn't offer further instructions. He didn't say what was in the briefcase. He didn't warn him not to touch it. He simply closed the car door and walked into the bustling cafe down the street, disappearing into the crowd. The city hummed around them. Horns blared, people rushed across sidewalks. The smell of roasted coffee and fried food filled the air. Yet inside the car, silence pressed down heavy. Daniel sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, eyes staring straight ahead. But no matter how hard he tried, his gaze kept drifting to the briefcase. It wasn't just sitting there, it was staring back at him. The temptation was alive. A man struggling to pay rent. A son with a sick mother and bills that piled higher every week. A dreamer who had grown up poor, who had always wondered what it might feel like to hold that kind of money in his hands. And now, for the first time in his life, fortune was just inches away. The car felt smaller by the minute. Daniel sat stiffly behind the wheel, trying to steady his breathing. The briefcase on the back seat wasn't just an object anymore. It was a presence. It loomed, silent but loud, whispering thoughts that Daniel didn't want to hear. He shifted in his seat, glancing in the rearview mirror. The shiny metal latch glinted under the light, and beneath it, the edge of the bills peeked out like a siren's call. The green ink seemed to glow brighter the longer he looked. "Just one stack," a voice in his head whispered. "One bundle could pay off your mother's medical bills. One bundle could get you through this month's rent. Who would even notice? He's a millionaire. What's 10,000 to him?" Daniel closed his eyes and gripped the steering wheel tighter. His knuckles turned white. He wasn't a thief. He had worked hard for every dime he'd ever earned. He had taken this job to start over, to prove to himself, and to his mother, that he could be trusted with responsibility. But responsibility was one thing. This was something else entirely. Money. More than he'd ever seen in one place. Enough to change his life overnight. His thoughts drifted back to the small apartment he called home. The peeling paint on the walls. The thin mattress where his mother lay coughing late into the night. The stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter. Each one a bill. Each one stamped with past due. He remembered the look on his mother's face when he landed this job. "Daniel," she had said softly, her voice frail but proud. "This is your chance. Don't let it slip away. You're better than the streets we came from." That memory was the only thing stopping him now. He shook his head and muttered under his breath, "Don't be stupid. Don't ruin this." Still, the weight of temptation was crushing. He thought about the world he grew up in, a neighborhood where kids barely made it past high school, where friends disappeared into gangs, and where the fastest way to money was always the wrong way. Daniel had fought hard to escape that trap. But right now, it felt like fate had dragged him back, testing him again. Seconds crawled like hours. He could hear his own heart thumping louder than the traffic outside. Every fiber of his being wanted him to look away, but his eyes kept darting to the case, as though it were magnetic. He imagined what it would feel like to open it. The weight of the bills in his hands. The power of being free from struggle, at least for once in his life. And then, he imagined his mother's voice. "Son, if it's not yours, it will never bring you peace." Her words struck him like a hammer, and Daniel suddenly felt ashamed that he had even considered it. He sat up straighter, gripping the wheel, and made a silent promise. "I won't touch it," he whispered. "Not even a finger." The temptation didn't vanish, it never does. But for the first time, Daniel felt stronger than it. The briefcase remained closed, untouched. The hour crawled by slowly, but Richard still hadn't returned. Daniel checked the clock on the dashboard for what felt like the 100th time. He tried distracting himself by scrolling through the radio stations, but nothing helped. His mind was restless, and that briefcase in the back seat wasn't making things any easier. Then, something shifted. In the corner of his eye, Daniel noticed a figure walking unusually close to the car. A man in a dark hoodie, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his head tilted just enough to glance through the tinted windows. Daniel tensed. He kept his eyes forward, pretending not to notice, but his instincts screamed otherwise. The man circled the car once slowly, then again, this time leaning closer, pressing his face near the glass. His eyes locked on the briefcase. Daniel's stomach sank. The man's lips curled into a greedy smirk. He tapped the window with his knuckles and muttered something Daniel couldn't hear. Then he tried the handle. Click. Locked. Daniel's pulse quickened. The man yanked harder this time, rattling the door. "Open up," his muffled voice barked. His tone was urgent, angry, and laced with desperation. "I know what's in there. Don't play dumb." Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't exactly step out and confront him. This guy looked unpredictable, maybe even dangerous. And he couldn't just sit there either. Then his eyes fell on the rearview mirror. The briefcase. The stranger had seen it. The money. That changed everything. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He turned the key, starting the engine with a low growl. The man slammed his hand against the glass, his voice louder now. "Open it. Just give me the case, and no one gets hurt." But Daniel refused. He shifted the car into gear and revved the engine loudly, the sound echoing down the street like a warning growl from a lion. The man flinched, but didn't back off. He pounded the window again. For a split second, Daniel wondered if the stranger might smash the glass. Without another thought, Daniel pulled out of the parking spot, tires screeching as he sped forward. The sudden movement forced the man to stumble back, cursing loudly as the Mercedes roared away. Daniel's heart pounded against his ribs. He drove several blocks before finally pulling over again, making sure the stranger was nowhere in sight. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. For a long moment, he sat there in silence, catching his breath. He turned his head slightly, eyes falling on the briefcase again. Still closed, still untouched. But now, for Daniel, it wasn't just about resisting temptation anymore. It was about something bigger. He had protected what wasn't his. He had kept it safe, not because he was told to, but because it was the right thing to do. And deep down, though he didn't know it yet, that decision would change his life forever. When Richard finally stepped out of the cafe, the sun had already dipped lower in the sky. The orange glow of late afternoon spilled across the sidewalk as he strolled back toward the car, sipping his coffee like he hadn't a care in the world. But inside the Mercedes, Daniel sat tense, his heart still recovering from the encounter with the hooded man. He straightened his posture, adjusted the mirrors, and forced his breathing to steady. The last thing he wanted was to appear shaken. Richard opened the door, slid into the back seat, and placed his coffee down beside him. Immediately, his sharp eyes flicked toward the briefcase. Still there. Still untouched. The latch hadn't moved an inch. "Everything all right?" Richard asked casually, his tone flat, unreadable. Daniel hesitated for a moment. He could lie. He could say nothing happened. But something inside him, the same thing that had stopped him from opening the briefcase, pushed him to speak the truth. "Sir," he began carefully, "a man tried to break into the car while you were gone." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Daniel continued. "He saw the case in the back seat. He tried the door handle and shouted at me to open up. I didn't. I started the engine and drove away until I lost him. I came back once it was safe." Silence filled the car. The kind of silence that made Daniel's chest tighten. Richard's expression remained calm, almost indifferent. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then placed the cup back down. "And the case?" "Untouched," Daniel said firmly. "I never laid a hand on it." I figured it wasn't mine, and I wasn't about to risk my job or my conscience over it. Another pause. Richard's face revealed nothing. He leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed on the passing street as Daniel began to drive. Daniel swallowed hard. That's it. I've blown it. He thought maybe he had done something wrong by leaving the original spot. Maybe Richard would see it as reckless. Maybe honesty wasn't what the millionaire wanted to hear. The ride to Richard's mansion was heavy with silence. Every turn of the wheel felt like judgment. Daniel's mind spiraled with doubts. What if he fires me? What if he thinks I'm lying? What if this was all just a setup, and I failed without realizing it? When they finally reached the estate, the tall iron gates swung open, and the car rolled up the long driveway. The mansion stood tall and imposing, a symbol of wealth built from years of grit and power. Daniel parked neatly, shut off the engine, and waited for Richard's verdict. The older man opened the door, stepped out, then leaned back and briefly. "Bring the case inside," Richard said simply. Daniel froze for a second before nodding. "Yes, sir." As he lifted the briefcase, he couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. He just didn't know if it would change his life for better or worse. The grand doors of Richard Hale's mansion swung open, and Daniel followed him inside, clutching the heavy briefcase in his hands. The marble floor gleamed under the chandelier's golden glow, and every corner of the mansion screamed wealth. Paintings, statues, and velvet furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Richard walked ahead with the calm stride of a man who owned not just the house, but the world itself. He motioned for Daniel to place the briefcase on a mahogany table in the foyer. "Open it," Richard said suddenly. Daniel froze. His palms turned clammy, and for a second, he thought he misheard. "Yes, sir." "You heard me," Richard said, his tone sharp. "Open it." Daniel's throat went dry. This was it, the moment of truth. Trembling, he set the case down and clicked open the latch. The lid lifted with a faint creak. His eyes widened. Inside, stacks of bills sat neatly on top, but as he looked closer, he realized something was wrong. Beneath the first few bundles of real money, everything else was nothing but blank paper wrapped with dollar bands. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "It's fake?" Richard's lips curled into the faintest smirk. "Not entirely. The top stacks are real. Enough to make it convincing. The rest worthless." Daniel's mind spun. All that temptation, all that weight, all those thoughts of his mother's hospital bills, and it had been a trick the entire time. "You passed," Richard said firmly, his eyes finally softening. "Passed," Daniel echoed, still reeling. Richard stepped closer, his voice low but powerful. "I've had dozens of drivers before you. Most can handle a steering wheel. Few can handle temptation. Money reveals character, son. And today, you revealed yours." Daniel swallowed hard, trying to process it all. Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a white envelope. He handed it to Daniel. "Here, this isn't part of your salary. Consider it a reward for honesty." Daniel hesitated before opening it. Inside was a check, not for a month's pay, not even for a year's, but for $50,000. His knees nearly buckled. "Sir, I can't take this." "You'll take it," Richard cut him off. "Because you earned it. You didn't touch the case when you could have. You didn't run when things got hard. And you told me the truth when it would have been easier to lie. That's worth more than any resume." Daniel's eyes stung as tears threatened to fall. He thought of his mother, lying in bed, coughing through the night. He thought of the bills stacked high on the counter, the fear that never left his chest. For the first time in years, he felt hope. Richard gave him a rare smile. "Welcome to the family, Daniel. I don't just hire employees. I invest in people." Daniel looked down at the envelope again, then back at the man who had tested him so cruelly, yet rewarded him so generously. In that moment, he understood something money could never teach. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in trust. And for the first time in his life, Daniel realized he had finally found both.